Okay, so a month ago, an investigation raised questions about Buffy Sainte-Marie's claim of Indigenous ancestry. Then last week, a documentary about her life won an International Emmy. There are big questions about how we grapple with Buffy's legacy. Today on the podcast, what do you do with the celebrations of a legend when their legacy has been called into question? I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Listen, so it's been a month since CBC's Fifth Estate aired an investigation into Buffy Sainte-Marie's claim of Indigenous identity, and for a while, Buffy didn't say much. But last week, she broke her silence and issued a statement. She said being Indigenous has, quote, little to do with sperm tracking and colonial record keeping. The occasion for her releasing a statement is what we're talking about today. So here's the context. A documentary about Buffy's life won an International Emmy Award. It is called Buffy Sainte-Marie, Carry It On. And obviously, how that documentary is being received now is a bit more complicated. Some people are saying, you know what, this should be called a work of fiction, given what we now know, what has been reported about Buffy's birth and belonging. And in case you need some kind of refresher on that, a birth certificate shows that she was born to white parents in Massachusetts, raising questions about her Indigenous ancestry. In Buffy's statement, I should say, she pointed out that she was adopted into a Cree family in accordance with Cree law and customs. Michelle Cyca is here. She's a freelance journalist and a member of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 6, which is in Saskatchewan. Michelle, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Elamin. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to have you here. Listen, I want to be clear. You know, this movie, Buffy Sainte-Marie, Carry It On, it came out at TIFF in September, weeks before the Fifth Estate piece aired. The filmmakers are standing by their work. They're also standing with Buffy. And it's not going down that well with others. I want to read you a statement that came out from the Indigenous Women's Collective. They posted this after the win was announced. The quote is, "It feels like a slap in the face. Documentaries are supposed to present factual information. Pretendianism is an act of colonial violence and should never be celebrated." What do you make of that statement?
I mean, I think it makes sense. It's kind of wild that it's a documentary. You would expect a documentary to have a factual basis. And this is kind of a big problem that strikes at the core of that documentary's premise, which is Buffy's accomplishments as an Indigenous woman. And it's not really a surprise to me that the filmmakers are standing behind her, but I think that's kind of the complicating factor when you're talking about such a big public figure, is that, you know, when there's a question of their identity like this, it implicates a lot of people who are connected to them.
I was going to say, you know, if you invest all that time and that effort into structuring this narrative around Buffy and you sort of bring it forward in this documentary, and clearly it's a documentary that is so well made that is deserving of an International Emmy, if you're the filmmakers, like, should you have refused the International Emmy given all this information that's come to light?
I mean, I think you could really make a moral case that you should, but I cannot imagine somebody doing that who's put so much time and so much work into a film like that. And I think, you know, that's also probably at the heart of Buffy's statement, and why every time there's a case like this where somebody is accused of faking their Indigenous identity, they never really back down from that claim later, no matter how much evidence there is. Everybody always doubles down. And I think it's just that there's too much at stake, and maybe there's no real benefit to just admitting that the jig is up.
Oof. Everybody doubles down because there's too much at stake. I want to return to that as a guiding principle. But let me just ask you, the people who are responsible for the awards aren't saying anything about, like, the timeline of their process. They may have well voted on this decision before the Fifth Estate piece aired. But what do you think this whole thing says about the integrity of their process in terms of the unchangeability, you know, of the votes or whatever that may be?
Yeah, I mean, who knows what kind of mysterious process goes into selecting the Emmy winners or any major award like that. I did look to see if any awards have ever been, like, recounted or taken back. I think even Bill Cosby still has his Emmys, but maybe they took them off the website. So it seems like there's no, you know, if there is a process for changing the selection later in light of new information, it seems to happen pretty rarely. But to me, it sort of captures something bigger, I think, about a lot of these discussions around pretendianism, where I think a lot of people just find the whole thing really confusing. And maybe they think, like, well, it's still an open question. You know, this is for Indigenous people to decide. Who am I to weigh in? I'm just going to go ahead and, like, act like this doesn't change anything for me. And I think, there's still lots of people reading Joseph Boyden's novels and probably thinking that he was representing something of the Indigenous experience there. Like, I think a lot of people just decide it's too messy and they don't want to think about it.
I think that's true. I think that the idea that like this is too messy, so therefore I'm not going to get involved, it sort of absolves you of the responsibility of engaging with the fact that, hey, you read Joseph Boyden's novels, they informed your idea of the Indigenous identity, then we sort of find out later that his claim was also not a correct one. But the idea that there's too much at stake, like that's what I want to return to, right? Like Buffy didn't change her stance at all when she spoke up last week. In her statement, she didn't really acknowledge much of the documentary, to be honest with you. Just kind of her firmly planting her feet where they always were. Did that surprise you at all in any kind of way?
I mean, I think I was surprised by the language of the letter. Like to say that, sperm tracking is this colonial invention. I mean, that's such a gross turn of phrase, but it's also, I would say, not really true. Sometimes there's this idea that Indigenous people had no record keeping, or that the idea of tracking family at all is some kind of colonial imposition. And it's true that Indigenous people were subjected to pretty rigorous record keeping by the government. The federal government regulates Indian status in Canada. Yeah. But Indigenous people have always kept track of their families. And in a way, that's, why so many Indigenous communities survived things like residential school in the 60s scoop, is because they remembered who was part of their community and who was lost. So to pretend that that's a colonial invention, I don't know. To me, that feels like it's kind of a baseless argument, or really just trying to undermine the criticism without offering any real substantial defense. I mean,
it's trying to skirt the discomfort in a way, right? It's trying to say like, well, there's a lot of discomfort around what does it mean about the conversations that I've been having about the Indigenous identity if I have to say this person is not Indigenous the way that I sort of understood them to be. And skirting discomfort, I mean, discomfort is a hard thing to sort of go through. I don't need to tell you how painful and divisive the story has been when the news first broke. How would you characterize the conversations that you're having, or maybe you're hearing about Buffy right now among Indigenous people?
It's really different depending on whether people have an emotional attachment to Buffy. So I grew up listening to Buffy's music. I have like a kid's book that she wrote that I read to my kids. And so I was really saddened by it, and I had a really hard time with it. And then I was talking to some friends and relatives who, don't have that special Buffy place in their heart. And they were like, well, this is just another story like every other Pretendian story. And I think that, to me, that, that makes it clear, like the emotional attachment people have, or, whatever other reason they have to have trouble believing the news, it really makes it hard to see it objectively, because it is personal. It's so personal for so many people. And I've seen a lot of Indigenous people online say, the CBC investigation was really convincing, but to them, Buffy will always be Buffy. And I think it's, she means a lot to people. Her impact is really bigger than I guess one investigation can fully take apart.
We got maybe about 30 seconds left here. What do you think should happen with all the awards that Buffy has won during her career, including like the 6 Juno Awards that she's won?
Yeah, I mean, I think that she should consider returning them. I think that would probably be a statement of integrity. And I think bodies like the Junos need to consider having a better process to make sure that their awards are really going to Indigenous people. Any organization that says this is something for the Indigenous community needs to be able to be accountable for what they're doing, how they're shaping that.
Michelle, I don't think we're done with this story, but I appreciate you being here this morning. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me on. Of
course. Michelle Cyca is a freelance journalist and a member of the Muskeg Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 6. She was in Vancouver. You can read more of Michelle's writing about Buffy Sainte-Marie in The Walrus. And listen, if you missed my chat with Shoshona Kish and Michelle Good about the Fifth Estate investigation, it was back on October 30th. Check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you're listening to Commotion. Listen, I want to begin this next interview by reading you this, okay? It's a warm Friday evening in the Bronx, and at the Taft High School field, people have come from all around to hear DJ Herc jam. His reputation as a party master is unsurpassed in the South Bronx. That is a part of an article covering an event featuring local New York DJ Kool Herc. It appeared in the Amsterdam News, New York's oldest black newspaper. The date for that article was July 1st, 1978. It happened 5 years after Kool Herc's now legendary back-to-school party. Many historians see that specific party as a foundational moment for the birth of hip-hop. That article was written by 20-year-old journalist named Nelson George. He was one of the first to do it. He was one of the first to document this new movement coming out of New York. His writing ended up helping lay the groundwork for what we now call hip-hop journalism. And it's been 50 years. 50 years later, Nelson is still exploring the power of hip-hop and Black American culture as an author, as a filmmaker. When I talked to Nelson George, we went all the way back to his start as a 20-year-old rookie journalist, curious about this new sound coming out of New York. Take a listen to this.
I went to college at St. John's University in Queens.
Yeah.
Then I would take a bus, 2 subways to Harlem with an intern at the Amsterdam News. Mm-hmm. Then I would take another subway down to Times Square, and I was an intern at Billboard magazine.
Wow.
So I had a mentor, a guy named Robert Ford, we called him Rocky, and he was sort of showing me the ropes. And we would go to, one thing he always talked about was you go to the record stores and talk to what's going on to retailers. Because you can talk to radio, you can talk to record companies, but the people who are selling the records are the people who really know what's happening. Right. So there was literally a record store in the subway station at 6th Avenue and 42nd Street. And the guy who owned the spot started talking about these kids from the Bronx, or uptown, he said. They were buying what they called cutout records, these records that hadn't sold. And it's like this whole phenomenon was happening. He didn't quite know what they were doing with the records. So one day he gets a flyer for this guy's party. And so Rocky says, let's go see what this guy's doing. So we took the D train up to the Bronx, got off at Yankee Stadium, walked across the Grand Concourse, which is a big main drag in the Bronx, to Taft High School. Yeah. A van pulls up, a white van, and a bunch of dudes come out. They pull out big speakers. They pull out card tables that they start arranging. Obviously, vinyl and milk crates. There's tons of that being lifted. And one guy goes over and unscrews the base of the streetlight, takes a wire cord, plugs it into the city's electricity, pulls it through the fence, and now we have a party. Right. And so this was Kool Herc and the Herculoids. And he was playing like bongo rock by the Incredible Bongo Band, which was a record that wasn't played at discos. It wasn't even really played at R&B parties, because you were still playing funk stuff. But this was a kid crowd, and they knew the records, and they knew that there's a funny quote in the article. I just interviewed this girl. She said, "The hustle's out, the freak is in." That's a song that Chic wrote La Freak about, right? So that was a kind of a body rockin' touch dance where you it's very nasty dance, basically. So it was a street dance. Yeah. So you can see this was not disco. The dancing they were doing was different. The clothes at the crowd was younger. Right. And the selection of music was different.
That's just there. Like, that's enough to say there is like the nebula of a movement, right? There's something sort of distinct that is going on from all these other movements.
Well, I would just add that. So within about 6 months of that party, I was on 125th Street, and the kid goes by on a boombox, hip hop, the hip, whatever. And it's I said, yo, what's up? Who, what's that? He goes, DJ Hollywood, act like you know. And he kept going. So, and DJ Hollywood was, in Harlem, but he was rapping over like these kind of beats. Yeah. So when I went to see Hollywood, he was with Lovebug Starsky. They were playing at City College of New York. They were like the in-between entertainment. But actually, everyone came to see them.
They were actually the thing that everybody was showing up for.
And, dip, dip, dab, so socialize, open up your ears and wiggle your behind like a big, big bag of what? Popcorn, the crowd yells. So everyone, there's a couple of thousand kids. They know all the rhymes already. So I'm walking in to something that, because I'm living in Brooklyn. Yeah. I'm walking into something that's been happening uptown. It's in Harlem, it's in the Bronx. Yeah. So I think the two things go hand in hand, because it was my introduction both to break beat playing records, or what they called B beats at that time.
Yeah.
And, rhyming at a high level.
Right. Now, listen, even after we got artists like Sugar Hill Gang, Curtis Blow, and others started to blow up commercially in the early 80s, a lot of people still saw rap as some kind of passing fad. But regardless of those naysayers, by the late 80s, New York City has kind of established itself at this epicenter of rap music, thanks to local artists who were sort of pushing the craft forward, pushing it up to new levels of lyricism, of activism, of creativity. Let's listen to this.
2 years ago, a friend of mine asked me to say some MC rhyme, so I said this rhyme I'm about to say.
It's been a long time, I shouldn't have left you without a strong rhyme to step to. Sit by the radio, hand on the dial soon. As you hear it, pump up the volume.
Bass, how low can you go? Death row, what a brother know. Once again, back is the incredible rhyme animal, the uncannibal, the Public Enemy #1.
Public Enemy, Bring the Noise. Before that, there was Eric B. and Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, and then also Run DMC. Though I gotta say, the period of time of rap that we just played, that's considered by a lot of people to be the golden era. My question to you is, what do you consider the golden age of hip hop journalism?
Well, there's different waves. Myself, I was part of a group at the Village Voice, which was Barry Michael Cooper, Carol Cooper, Harry Allen, like great Tate, obviously.
Rest in peace.
So there was a whole group of us, and so it was interesting just in terms of the arc of the writing.
Yeah.
So I did those early articles in Amsterdam News. The black media, black teen magazines like Black Beat, they were aimed at teenagers.
Yeah.
And there was some of you could sell stuff to the New York Rocker, which was the punk rock crowd.
Yeah.
They were
interested?
They were the first white audience. So the thing to understand is that the first white audience of hip hop was the downtown hip hop. There was a club called The Grill where there were parties. Everyone talks about the Roxy roller rink.
Yeah.
And that crowd was adventurous alternative.
Right.
So
that an expansive kind of palette musically.
Right.
Yeah.
So they were open to it because they saw it as a corollary to new wave and punk.
Right. Oh, I see.
It wasn't till really Run started doing the rock records, Rock Box and King of Rock.
I'm the king of rock, there is none higher. Sucker MCs should call me sire. To burn my kingdom, you must choose fire. I won't stop rocking till I retire. Now we rock dog parties.
You go, oh, the heavy metal white kids. And then the Beasties help push that door open even wider.
Of course.
So then it becomes, it goes from hip white, underground crowd.
Yeah.
Where Curtis Blow's playing the Peppermint Lounge, the same spot the Clash might play. Mm-hmm. And also, I remember, when the Clash played New York, Curtis Blow opened for the Clash. I saw him at the Pier. I think Flash did it. They opened for the Clash.
Curtis Blow and the Clash, what a bill.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Curtis got, had to dodge spit and beer cans and stuff.
Yeah.
And then it changes over in the late 80s. And that's when the major labels started paying more attention.
Of course.
And I think one of the things that's never mentioned anymore, because no one wants to admit this, MC Hammer, who no one talks about this. I've had no one talk about him this 50th year. He sold 11 million records in 1988, 89, 90, right?
Yeah.
He helped open a lot of doors for pop. As hip hop is pop. There's no doubt about it.
Don't make me do this. Don't make me have to sit with the discomfort of the fact that MC Hammer, in fact, kicked the door open for me.
The video for
You can't touch this.
How massive was that? You told me that Puffy didn't listen to that, and didn't.
I can't.
And didn't hear hear all the samples he did.
Yeah.
That use of the Rick James sample, the obvious R&B pop sample, becomes the template.
Yeah.
For Bad Boy. It is.
My apologies to MC Hammer.
Yeah, give Hammer his props, man.
That's on me. That is on me.
Exactly.
I'm going to give him his props. Listen, by the mid to late 90s, we kind of get to this moment where rap is just about to take over the pop mainstream. And then you get hip-hop journalism becoming its own massive, set of empires, right? We got magazines like The Source, there's Vibe, there's Ego Trip, to name a few. How would you describe that period of hip-hop journalism?
Well, that's the first time the acknowledgement by advertisers that this is that this can be Rolling Stone. that this is its own thing. And I think that's the vision of what Dave Mays and John Schechter had was the source.
Yeah.
Obviously, Quincy, people figure Quincy helped found the Vibe magazine.
Yes.
That this could stand on its own. So it brought in a whole new generation of writers, Joan Morgan, Scott Paulson Bryant. There was a whole generation, Torre, who all came through those doors.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave people a chance to have a hip-hop, be called a hip-hop journalist, because when I started, and all through the years I was writing for The Voice and elsewhere, I consider myself a black, and I still do consider myself a black music journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I think hip-hop is not it's part of what I've covered.
It's one of your languages.
Yeah,
but it's
not the core of my understanding.
Yeah.
Whereas for many people, hip-hop is their central language.
I do want to go back a little bit and talk about one big contentious moment in hip-hop media, and that is the way that the story was covered, the beef between Biggie and Pac. Both were murdered in separate drive-by shootings, and a lot of people believe that this was tied to their personal beef. But before their murder, Vibe magazine, which had been covering that beef quite closely, famously featured Biggie and Puff on the cover of that September 1996 issue, and it read East versus West. Looking back now, what do you make of that moment in hip-hop journalism?
Well, I mean, you follow the story. You got to remember, because I just worked on a 5-part Dear Mama series.
And it's so good, dude. It's so good.
So,
yeah.
A lot of that, especially Tupac and Suge, they made it a story.
They did.
So how do you not cover that? I mean, so people are blaming the journalist for something that's being said by, if one of the biggest artists in the genre,
yeah,
and the biggest record company executive in the genre at the time, Death Row, are both saying F the East Coast or this guy or that guy.
It's a story.
It's a story.
Yeah.
And Puff and Big's response is the story as well.
Right.
And it was clearly East Coast, West Coast. So, I mean, I don't blame anybody for covering what was happening. It's not their fault.
Did it feel like it added fuel to the fire in an unhelpful way, do you think? Or
I think the most unhelpful thing was hit him up.
Right.
First off, in the click you claim West Side when we ride, come equipped with game. You claim to be a player, but I your wife. We bust on bad boys for life. Plus Buffy trying to see me weak. Hearts I rip. Biggie Smalls and Junior Mafia some more.
Now, how do you not write about that?
Right. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and today we're talking to the legendary Nelson George. Listen, I'm really glad that you're here. I want to talk about the rise of blogs and the rise of social media and how it kind of changed how hip-hop is covered. And in ways that honestly, frankly, make me really uncomfortable. You get a lot more willingness to cover, for example, rumors than you had before. What was that reaction you just had there?
Hip-hop,
Yeah.
The internet is a land of mythology.
Yes.
Where people can make
In a good way or a bad way?
In a bad way.
Okay.
They can make up any story they want. It travels. There's no copy editing, so some of the stuff is illiterate. There's no,
That's true.
You just boom. So there's very little discourse, as I understand it. So I'm going to do a commercial. You hold up my book.
You're holding up the Nelson George Mixtape Volume 2, a collection of your pieces from
1978 all the way up to, I think, to 2004, an interview with Andre 3000.
Yeah. How would you say the journalism that exists now is different from that kind of journalism?
Well, I have a big piece on LL Cool J versus Kool Moe Dee, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's things in there I say, well, this track isn't that good, or this track isn't that good, but but he's a worthy artist.
Right.
Today, there'd be 50 million people, stands hitting me saying, how can you write that, blah, blah, blah. So the idea that you can criticize and yet respect and admire, that's not something. That's
kind of gone away.
It's not really supportable by the way that people write now, or else it's a total diss thing.
Yeah.
So it's never really a discussion about the artistry for the most part.
Yeah.
It's about either it's the greatest thing ever made, or it's totally whack.
Right.
Certainly the idea of nuance, it's kind of out the window.
Do you feel that, like, how would we get that nuance back? How do you think?
I don't know.
There's I guess, like, the only way through this is to find critics that you respect, critics that you like, and really sort of pay attention closely to their work. One of my favorites is Craig Jenkins. He writes for Vulture.
Sure.
And Craig is the kind of guy who he's not going to do the same day album review. It's going to come out 5-6 days later. It comes out when it's ready because he's had a chance to sort of digest that. But
I think that's what you respect. I mean, and I think that's one of the problems with all communication through the internet.
Yeah.
Is that everything is knee-jerk reaction.
But also I see places like, I don't know, the Joe Budden podcast and go like, this seems like an evolution in hip hop media.
Well,
right?
I mean, the podcast thing is the new because there's not really the source and not really Vive.
That's right.
As authoritative sources of information.
Yeah.
The podcasts have taken a lot of that space, and that's where actually, in a strange way, if you get the right moment with the artist and the podcaster.
Yeah.
You can get some information, you get some nuance, you get some stuff that you might not have heard. So I think they play a really central role in many ways, even though they can be a little exploitive themselves.
Yeah,
the fact that the person is being interviewed there allows them a chance to have their own narrative.
Yeah.
So I think that's good overall.
Now, all year, there's been all these celebrations of Hip Hop 50. Actually, we've been doing a series on this show in terms of visiting like different pockets of hip hop. When we think about hip hop at 50, that's us contextualizing the past and contextualizing the legacy that we've arrived at. But when we think about the hip hop future, where would you like to see hip hop go from here?
Well, I don't really think about hip hop going anywhere. I think about music. And so what I see happening is when you see what's coming with what's going with Afro beats.
Yeah.
Out of Quiet as Kept, that is becoming a massive global phenomenon that people can say hip hop is the biggest music in the world. Not right now.
Not right now, no.
Between Afrobeats and also Bad Bunny.
Yeah.
Hey.
Bad Bunny's so big, we don't even know how to contextualize how big Bad Bunny is.
So it just goes to show you that again, I'm not going to judge hip hop now because I'm too old to be judging the music. Yeah. But in terms of the reach of what's being done now, the reach of it is smaller, and part of it is some of it is context. It feels like it's talking to itself and not talking outside as much as it used to. Here, I mean, when I'm coming out of the States.
Interesting. So there was a period you felt there was a period where hip hop was more expansive,
absolutely, and
right now it's kind of contracting in a way.
I feel like that's what's going on musically and thematically.
Yeah.
And also, you know, whereas you have highly melodic music, which is Afrobeats is super melodic and danceable.
Yeah.
I think Africa
it's in conversation with hip hop, of course, but
But I think Africa in general, I think what's going on there. Yeah. I think if I was going anywhere, if I was a young Nelson George, I'd go to Lagos. I'd love to see what's going on and hang out and see what's going on in clubs and who's the Russell Simmons of this place or who's the Andre Harrell of because stuff is going on there. Yeah. And there's a machine there in the same way that K-pop has a machine. You know, how did that thing? So when you see these global scenes, you realize that there's energy nexuses that happen. Yeah. Whether it's Seattle with grunge. Yeah. You can go through the whole history of pop music.
You pay attention to the little locusts of
and that's actually what I learned that from hip hop.
Right.
From from being 20 years old and wandering around the city and being on subways late at night. You know.
Well, Nelson George, I appreciate you being here, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My chat with journalist and filmmaker Nelson George. And if you're interested in the essential writings of Nelson George, check out the Nelson George Mixtape Volumes 1 and Volumes 2. And that is it for the podcast today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, I'm going to be here tomorrow. If you're going to be here, I'll see you then.